Welcome to the March 2017 update for the Microsoft Australian OEM team. In this update, we'll be focusing on Windows Server, specifically some of the new storage capabilities and enhancements that have been made. But as we've been doing recently, we'll kick off with an overview of the different editions because this does tie very strongly into the storage conversation. So just to make sure that you've got a good understanding of what's included with the different editions of Windows Server 2016. And then we'll move on to three different areas. First up, we'll focus a little bit on the data deduplication capabilities. Now, I know quite a few of you do use this on Server 2012 R2, for example. So I'll talk about some of the enhancements that you can see here when you work with that. And then what we'll do is we'll switch over to talk about storage spaces, which I know quite a few of you are already using, and then Storage Spaces Direct, or S2D, which was introduced with Windows Server 2016. Then we'll move on to Storage Replica, and then just a quick wrap up of some of the different resources that are available for you to help you on your journey to learn more about Server 2016, as well as other activities that are happening in Australia at the moment. So let's jump in and talk about the Server 2016 editions. So if we take a look at the three versions that are sold through the OEM channel, we've got Essentials Edition, which I know a lot of you who deal with small SMB customers with 25 users or less, or 50 devices or less. Essentials sells at a good price point for people who just have got some pretty basic requirements. It's an easy way to get Windows Server deployed. One of the things that is great for SMB environments is that the licenses are actually included with the product. So that 25 users is actually covered by the base license for that product. Now, where would you jump from Essentials to Standard? Well, really the main thing that would start driving that is, well, first of all, let's say you've got 26 users, for example, that would be a great place to start. Or if you're already got a customer who's close to 25 and they're still growing, I'd be a little bit reluctant to put them onto Essentials and then have to go out and buy Standard all over again. But generally with Standard Edition, the conversation is, do you have lightweight virtualization requirements? So at this point with Standard, we need to buy CALs for Standard. We're still covered by the two virtual machines that Standard included previously. But instead of those two virtual machines, if we wanted to use Hyper-V containers instead, that would definitely be something we could use as an alternative. When it comes to Windows Server containers, so the lighter weight version of containers that don't have all the security benefits of Hyper-V containers, we've got the ability to run unlimited server containers across Standard as well as Data Center, as you can see here. Now, as we move across to Data Center, the important things to note here is that the CALs are the same, unlimited virtual machines, as well as unlimited Hyper-V containers. So that kind of makes sense if Standard Edition is limited to either 2 VMs or 2 Hyper-V containers, then that Data Center allows unlimited on both. Now, where things really start getting different with Data Center with 2016 is a lot of the new enhancements that are targeting some of the larger deployment types that are only available as part of the Data Center Edition. So we'll focus on that top box for today, which is that storage features including Storage Replica and Storage Spaces Direct. But other technologies that are included in Data Center include the new network controller that gives us a top-down view of our basically our physical and virtual network adapters across our Windows Server and Hyper-V environment, so we can really manage them all in one go and build out infrastructure the same way we might do inside of Azure Virtual Networks, for example. Now, the other option that's included with Data Center is shielded VMs and the Host Guardian service. So this is something where we're looking at environments where we really need to make sure that the VMs that are running in one networking infrastructure are completely isolated from the other, so that we can really start splitting out the management of the infrastructure out from the management of what's actually running there in terms of the virtual machines and the virtual networks. Now, all of these additional items that are included in that red box are generally things that do have additional requirements, way over and above what your typical SMB customer is actually going to be looking at if it's a smaller SMB customer. So in most cases, I'd say if it's a customer who's looking at Data Center and thinking, is it worth the extra to pay that, really the important thing there is you have to have a look at what the associated costs are to actually start implementing some of these additional technologies. And you'll get an idea as we go through on the storage side what some of those additional requirements are when we do look at Storage Spaces Direct. Now, just another slide on the storage the Windows Server 2016 editions here. So starting off, we covered the first three: Data Center, Standard, and Essentials. The important thing to note here on this slide that's called out is the licensing model column. So we've covered this a lot in the past, and we're doing a series of live webinars at the moment around this. But we've got core-based licensing. So you're paying for Windows Server based on the number of CPU cores that the server contains, as opposed to buying it based on the physical CPU count and just the virtual machine count as you had to do previously. So if you haven't watched one of those webinars, make sure you sign into smarthq.com.au and take a look at those. We will be running those on a regular basis because we are getting a lot of questions over this. And the good news is that most of the questions that are coming through today are ones that we've already heard variations on. So we can generally get a pretty quick reply to you if you do have questions, or if you're sort of thinking this is a slight variation of that. Hopefully we can address those quite quickly for you. Now, as you can see, there are other products that are listed in here. The final three products: Multipoint Premium Server, Storage Server 2016, and Hyper-V Server, they're not things we actually supply directly through Channel OEM. I just thought I'd include those on here so you can see that versions of these are available or are becoming available. But in general, you'll need to talk to the appropriate distribution point for any of those products. So let's jump in with a nice, quick, and easy one: the data deduplication enhancements. So I threw this one in first because it's one that we can get through quickly, and it's one that I know a lot of you are already starting to use in your Server 2012 based environments. So really the big changes that we've got with data deduplication here are around what the officially supported file sizes and volume sizes are. So now we've got support for up to 10 terabytes up to 64 terabytes per volume, and we've also got officially got support for files up to 1 terabyte in size. So this means that for a lot of organizations, we're really going to be covering their storage requirements very, very well. Now, if you're looking at that 64 terabytes and thinking, I'd really like to go above that, remember here we're talking about 64 terabytes per volume. So if you're creating virtual disks, and instead of just creating one huge volume, you could split them out to multiple volumes. So that would be a great way for you to be able to go above 64 terabytes, but still stay within that supported realm of what Microsoft actually allows. As we were going out in October and November for the OEM Roadshow activities for Windows Server 2016, I was having some conversations with people who were saying that they're actually, they didn't realize that 64 terabyte, that there was that 10 terabyte limit in the past, and that they had been using much larger volumes. Now, the thing that you have to bear in mind there is when you do start using larger volumes, it's not the amount of data that's really the critical piece, it's the churn of data. So can the dedupe process actually keep up with new data as it's being written to disk? Now, where this has been addressed with Server 2016 is the next bullet point, which is the multi-threaded support per volume. So this means that we can spawn off multiple threads to go through and work on the data deduplication capabilities. So that's one of the things that allows us to go through and perform these in a much faster time frame. And really allow more churn on data volume on the disk without it falling behind. Now, you'll also see it's multi-threaded per volume. So you could imagine, as you start scaling this up, there could be periods where CPU activity could actually get quite high, especially if you are looking at things like having combinations of NVMe, SSD, and mechanical drives for mass storage. These are things that can actually, as you could imagine, start taking up quite a few CPU cycles, especially with some of those faster storage types. Now, some other enhancements that have been made to data deduplication. So first of all, if you've been looking at Nano Server, the very, very lightweight version of Windows Server for certain workloads, if you install the storage roles with that data deduplication capabilities, it is one of the feature sets that's supported there. You'll also find now with data deduplication in Server 2016 that there's a third option now for what type of volume would you like it to deduplicate. So in the past, the first one was general purpose file server. Then in Server 2012 R2, the VDI scenario was also added, and now you've also got backup server supported as well. So it has slightly different behaviors around different types of files that it will work with by default based on which of those selections you choose. And now the final thing on here, for those of you who are looking at doing cluster upgrades, etc., that one of the new cluster capabilities, the Cluster OS rolling upgrade feature, is actually something that is supported by the data deduplication capability as well. So just letting you know that these different capabilities do work together. So that's really just a quick one when we do talk about, when we're talking about the data deduplication. Now, I have posted previously on the Oz OEM team blog site a few different links to some of the different articles on data deduplication. So things that really drill into more detail around that. And you'll also find in probably one of the links that you found that got you to this video, you should find some additional resources there that really help you figure out, what's going on, how can I start optimizing that. So let's move on now and start talking about storage spaces and storage spaces direct. So if we start off with a conversation about traditional storage, well, what normally happens here is with traditional storage from a Windows side, so if we're talking about Hyper-V, Hyper-V doesn't really care what that back-end storage is, and it's also not that fussed overall via the connectivity through to that back-end storage. Now, that's not saying that you can put anything in place. Obviously, it has to be up to certain technology and performance requirements. But as we go through and start building that out, effectively what we've got is that network connectivity, or maybe it could be direct attachments, and then inside of that storage array, it might be a SAN, we'll have disks, we'll have raw storage that we can add into that. Now, some of the other approaches that people take for building this out is that some people might build it out using scale-out file servers. So this was something that people were doing with Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, and they were running storage spaces on top of that. Now, other people were going through running the network shares through to that, and then they were going through and extending it further and further. Now, one of the things that we start talking about now is the idea of converged with storage spaces direct. So this way we've got the ability to go through and start having the virtual machines running on top of the same hardware. So effectively the VMs are running on the virtualization host, which can then connect through to our SMB file shares on their scale-out software, and we can start using storage spaces direct down in those local servers. Now, what you can see there through the slide animations is that we've got data constantly being synchronized between those storage options. And as we talk through this, you start seeing how these pieces come together. Now, when we go from converged to hyper-converged, this is really where things start getting quite different from the Windows perspective. So this is where we start saying we actually want to start scaling out a server at a time. So in this case, instead of saying we want to scale compute out separately to storage, which is what we do on the previous slide, in this case, we're building out a farm of identical compute and storage nodes. So it's compute and storage in each node. So as we add them in and bring them online, we're increasing disk capacity, and we're also increasing the number of VMs, etc. we can run across that environment. Now, as we start drilling in and taking a look, each of the nodes has got caching and capacity drives. So the way to think about this generally is, the easy way to begin with, the cache drives are going to, in a lot of cases, are going to be SSD or NVMe, and then, or alternatively, then the capacity drives are going to be SSDs or HDD. So in some cases, people might be using SSD as the high performance cache drives, and then hard drives for the potential, for the full potential of maxing out capacity. Or in other environments, people who really need high performance across the board and just don't want mechanical drives anywhere in the solution, they could deploy this out using NVMe as the front end while using SSDs as the capacity devices. So as we keep building this out, what we have here is the destaging cache. So through that animation, you saw that as data started cooling down, we were able to actually go through and move data from that caching tier down to that cooler tier of mechanical storage. So effectively, this means that we can keep it there and then write it out as required, so that basically it gets flushed and flushed in an optimized way to really minimize the overall system impact. This means that those caching devices have always got additional space. They can always take more workload. So if there's bursty activity taking place, it can sort of keep hitting that storage tier without really having a negative impact when it then goes out to the mechanical storage. Now, each of these slabs of data is basically each virtual disk that we create here is broken into 256 megabyte slabs, and then those slabs are then split out across multiple storage spaces direct servers that are in our environment. So in the example that we'll use here, we'll use a three-way mirror. So here you can see I've got virtual disk A at the top and virtual disk B. Now, as we drop those in as three-way mirror disks, we've got the first copy of of disks A and B, but then we've also got the second copy and the third copy of those. So as we keep going through and expanding that, you'll see that we go from 33% efficiency up to 50% efficiency when we get to 4 nodes. And then we can keep scaling out. So when we get to 7 nodes, we get 66% efficiency. What you'll also notice here is that first server with the S on it, we can actually start having, we automatically start adding some additional, or give you the option of having an additional server sitting there basically as the spare server. So while its capacity isn't actually being used, if one of the other systems goes offline, we can start rebuilding, or if we choose to take it offline, we can start rebuilding out based on the additional copies that we still have out on that spare server. Now we can keep scaling up. So in this case, we can scale yet again. So now we're up to 9 nodes, and now we're at 75% efficiency. So the important thing to note when we do look at this is that the maximum number of nodes that are actually supported is 16 nodes here. So this is not designed to, replace everyone's, large-scale infrastructure that's already out there. It's not designed to go out and replace the server farms and environments that are out there in a lot of larger customer or hosting type environments. This is really about people who've got specific requirements where they need to be able to go through and start scaling these things out quite simply. So as we keep going through the animated slides here, as I mentioned, we can go through, we can write to that performance tier, and then what we'll do is, as the writes are then written out to the capacity tier, it actually tries to minimize the CPU overhead, etc. So it basically flushes it out across the environment in a simple way. So the data is asynchronously moved out to the capacity tier, and what we call the erasure coding, it means that we can really get that highest level of storage efficiency as we start scaling out. Now, a couple of things to note in this slide is, first of all, we can see here, the hot data, so red means hot, it sits out on those caching devices, but you'll also notice a reference to REFS, so Resilient File System, which is the next gen version of Microsoft's file system. So we've gone from FAT to FAT32 to NTFS, and REFS is in a lot of cases already in scale type scenarios the replacement for NTFS. Now, it's not something that's universally supported across all different types of workloads. So we're not at the point yet where we can say, look at REFS for everything. There'll be some things where REFS makes a lot of sense. Scenarios where people are building new VMs, where they're copying things, where they're duplicating, etc. REFS is very, very efficient for a lot of those types of activities. So as we keep going through now and talking through some of the additional slides we've got in here, we've got the converged solution. So when we take a look at the converged solution, this is where we've got the Hyper-V cluster being separated out from the file server cluster. So we've got very, very high performance between them. We've got, we might have, multiples of gig Ethernet. We might have 10 gig Ethernet. We could have RDMA enabled adapters, for example. But we scale each of these out independently from each other. If we take a look at what we can actually use as that storage fabric, well, even though Microsoft does have its own solution, so the two on the right, scale out file server with storage spaces direct and scale out file services with storage spaces, these are both options that Microsoft provides in box with Data Center. But obviously, Microsoft, strongly supports third parties, so that if you wanted to use iSCSI, if you wanted to use third-party NASs, third-party SANs, etc., it's really up to you what you use there. But Microsoft just sort of wants you to know that they do have options for people who are looking at some of these types of scenarios. Now, as we start taking a look at the next stage, moving from that converged solution over across to hyper-converged, let's just spend a couple of minutes here talking about some of the things we need to take into account in these hyper-converged scenarios. So first up, as we're scaling out, because the scale out scenario assumes that we've got similar performance across all of the servers that are in there. So having so trying to have servers as identical as possible to each other in there is really an important part of the strategy. Now, other things to take note of here is this: because we're doing synchronization of data between those scale-out file servers, which are effectively part of the same solution. So we've got, the Hyper-V hosts and scale-out file server rolled into one. You really need to seriously consider, what kind of processing power is required for this and what kind of networking fabric you need to have between those servers. So this is something where, gig Ethernet is not going to cut it. 10 gig Ethernet might cut it, but generally speaking, people will say, the recommendations here are going to be, well, you need to have, 2 connections anyway for high availability. Now, realistically, for people who are really trying to max this out, the recommendation is to start looking at RDMA adapters, because it's not just the speed that's important, it's also the impact that it has on the overall performance of the servers themselves. Because you have to think about, what can we do to minimize the CPU impact on the virtual machines that we're running alongside trying to make sure that performance is as high as possible. So that's why things like RDMA adapters, etc., are an important part of this overall solution. Why things like your NVMe or SSD tiers over and above your physical disks are also an important part of this solution. So this is something that you can see that it's quite specific in what Storage Spaces Direct targets, but the important takeaway is that it's something that's in here. It's included with Windows Server Data Center Edition, and you can see that for a lot of customers who buy Windows Server Standard Edition, they don't really have the networking infrastructure in place to really kind of deploy this out today with the the technology that they've got in place in terms of switching infrastructure, network infrastructure, etc. So now let's move across and take a look at the final piece of technology that we'll cover today that's included with Windows Server 2016 storage. Now, I don't want to say that this is these are the only enhancements to storage. There are other enhancements, things like quality of service enhancements, etc., that are included, but they're not part of today's recordings conversation. So let's take a look at Storage Replica. And in this case, what we can do with Storage Replica is have synchronous or asynchronous replication across multiple locations. So if we have synchronous replication, then basically that means we've got very high speed connections with very low latency. So think of that from one suburb in a city to another suburb in a city where they've got incredibly high speed connectivity between them. When we start looking at async might be from city to city, or it might be from one country to another. But obviously it can't be too slow or have too much latency, otherwise it's just going to fall behind and not be able to catch up. So let's take a look at it in a little bit more detail. So we basically go through, we've got mirroring of the data across the physical sites, and we've got crash consistent volumes. So this means that if one of the sites goes offline, we can bring the other one up without any issue. Now, this is just something that's part of Windows Server Standard Edition. So previously people have had to look at SANs or third-party software solutions in order to deliver this, but in this case it's just part of Windows Server Data Center. Now, like some of the other things that I mentioned in some of the previous storage and networking conversations, Microsoft, while they do have their own storage technologies, if you're already working with third-party storage vendors, if you've got a preference for a particular SAN or NAS provider, Microsoft will still go through and give abilities to integrate with those to work across multiple network solutions as well. And then finally, you've got management through PowerShell, through the GUI as well. So you've got multiple ways to go through and interact with that. So now let's move to the final section, which is the resources. So let's talk about some of the upcoming events we've got. So the first two, I don't have dates for these yet, but I thought I'd sort of just give you an idea of what's coming, and contact us via the email address in the resources slide that's next if these are things that you're interested in and you want to get a heads up on these. So the first one is a Windows 10 Plus Enterprise Mobility Exam Readiness Session. So this is for people who need to upgrade their MCP exams and they want to do a Windows 10 exam. This is one where we'll have free exam vouchers and free practice exams for a limited number of people, and this is a Sydney-only event. It's something that there will be an in-person process, and then everyone who attends has to then on the afternoon sit the exam. So it's not something where you come in and we give you the exam questions and answers. You come in, we try to fill in gaps that you might have on particular pieces that are covered by the exam. We'll go through a few sample questions, and then you get to do the exam afterwards. Now, for someone who hasn't done a Microsoft exam before or isn't really ready for an exam, it's probably not the best way to go. This has got the intention of, people who've previously been certified on Windows 8 or 8.1 and some Microsoft Cloud exposure who want to try to sort of get their skills to the next level and get through the exam. Now, next up, we've got the Windows 10 Tech Series. So the dates for these are being proposed at the moment, but these are a series of 3-day events. We've already run a couple around the country. I think Sydney and Melbourne have run already. The next ones that budget has come through for are Sydney and Perth. So this is 3 days of in-depth training on Windows 10 deployment and management. So again, if you're interested in either of these and you'd like to get an idea of the time frame, email us at oemserverau@microsoft.com. I'll have that on the next slide, so I won't spell it out now, and you'll get to see how that works. Now, the final thing as well is we've got those of you who have already gone down the modern management path with Windows 10 and are looking at how do you get more out of the different Microsoft Cloud solutions that can manage Windows devices that are out in the wild. We've got 3 rounds of enterprise mobility and security training coming up. So one in Melbourne, Sydney, and then the 20th to the 23rd, where it doesn't have a city, that's actually Perth. So again, if you need more details on those, please email us on the slide that I've got coming up next. So what resources do we have available for you? So I generally try to sort of push updated information out to the Australia OEM team blog site a couple of times a week. Sometimes it's much more often than that. So right now I'm trying to sort of bring together the best, or not necessarily, I don't mean the best, but I guess the more system builder and OEM oriented sessions that were just delivered at the Australian Ignite session last week. So take a look at what's available there, see basically, you've got a bunch of 60 to 75 minute videos that are pretty much up to date as of last week in terms of content. So a great place to take a look and use it as a launch pad for those. Now, for pre-sales information for Microsoft OEM products, you've got oemserverau@microsoft.com. So just the the usual disclaimer with this one is it's not a product support alias. So if you've deployed a product and you're having issues with that, you should go to the support forums on Microsoft.com for that. We don't have support engineers who look after this alias, so contacting people via that with a support request, that's not a pre-sales request. It's just going to slow down the support process for you by trying to avoid the appropriate channels. And then finally, we've got Smart HQ. So this has had a revamp recently. So you can go through and take a look at what's up there. We've got new information coming up there all the time. For those of you who do want to watch one of the recorded versions of the Windows Server 2016 licensing sessions for OEM, please go up to that, go to smarthq.com.au, and you'll probably also find that when we do run new versions of that, it might be worth joining when we do run new versions of that webinar because it gives you a chance to listen to some of the questions people are asking, and you might have a few questions of your own around the shift from per CPU licensing across to per core licensing. So that's everything for today's recording. So thank you very much for joining us. You've got multiple ways to get in contact with us to keep up to date with the things that are important for us. So make sure that you get a chance to, take a look at some of the resources, and hopefully we get to see you at one of our upcoming in-person events or one of our online events. So thank you very much for your time and look forward to hearing from you.